Okay, we're live. All right, just a quick recap for anyone who's joining us in the future on the YouTube recording. Today we're going to make a state and props based cart feature so we can keep track of what people are shopping for. Cool. Let's jump into things. So we have our dummy products where we have a chair and a lamp. I think we should add maybe one more thing in here really quick. Let's call this very lame. Give it a description. This is a very cool backpack. Not enough dinosaurs. Just so we have a little bit of extra product data. Say this is maybe $80. Discount is 15% off. Make this seller someone named Bob, and we'll get an image really quick of a backpack. Hopefully that worked. Sweet. Okay, so we have 3 products. So what I think we need to do first, before we do anything, is we need to make sure that we have a button so that someone can actually say, I want to buy some amount of this product. We could have a button that just adds something to your cart. And we could just make them click maybe like 3 times if they want to add the lamp 3 times. But I think we should probably make a little component so that we can control how many of a product we want to allow someone to purchase at a time. So if they want to buy 3, they just like hit the plus arrow that increases, or maybe they can just type in and say how many things they want, and then hit add to cart. So let's do that really quick. Let's go into our product listing. I'm thinking out loud here that it's possible we might make this its own component and then use the component in here. I don't necessarily know that there is enough of a justification to make it its own component, just because it'll be pretty small. But in theory, it is something that we could use elsewhere in our application. Like maybe we have different pages where people can purchase a product. Then I don't want to have to recreate that HTML everywhere. So I'm thinking maybe we just make it its own component here. Maybe we can create a folder for our product table, and we'll create a folder for miscellaneous, and we'll make a new component in here. What should we call this? We should call this maybe quantity selector. That feels relatively descriptive of what it's doing. Export default quantity selector. And we'll return just some basic data for a second. And then I'm going to take this other stuff that's specific to my product table and throw it inside of that. So everything that goes on this page in particular is going to be in here, and maybe some components that we're going to use another time will go in this miscellaneous folder. So this table, this is pretty product specific. This search bar, we could make this generic. This title in here is not very generic right now, so maybe we'd want to swap that out. But for now, I'm just going to throw it in with the miscellaneous components. And let's go into that quantity selector. Maybe split screen this if we can. Okay, so I have my products. I have my product listing. And somewhere in here, I would like to have my quantity selector component. And what this should show me is an input with some buttons to increase or decrease the count, and then a button to actually add it to the cart. And we'll add some functionality there. But let's at least throw some HTML in here so that it does what we want it to do. We're going to throw this in a box since we want it to have a layout. And inside the box, we'll maybe add 2 buttons sandwiching input. So this button is going to be to decrease the quantity, and this is going to be to increase the quantity. And then our input will be the actual like number that we're interested in adding to the cart. And we'll want to show whatever the current value is in there. And then with that, we'll probably need another button to add to the carts. So let's start filling these in here. Maybe this is going to be a minus. This is going to be a plus. And we'll need an on-click handler to say when I am subtracting an item, what am I going to do? We'll leave this open just for a second. And then we're going to do the same thing here. So these are both going to do something when they're clicked. And then we have our input. So someone needs to be able to type in this input and change the value. So maybe it starts at 1, and then we want them to be able to type in and change it to 10. But we also want to be able to control what value is in this input based on the results of clicking this button. So with that in mind, this to me feels like we probably need to use some state to control this input. That way we can update the state from something totally different, like the button getting pressed. And we can say the input is going to be whatever the state currently is. If the state says there's 7, and the input is going to show 7. But someone can also type into the input, and we'll handle that event when they change the input and update our state like that. I am a little hesitant. I am interested to see if we run into a case where when I update the state from a button, the input changes and then the onChange event is called for that input. I don't know if that's going to happen. I hope not. Otherwise, we're going to be in trouble. But maybe we can cross that bridge when we get there. So if we're going to make a controlled component or controlling this input using state, what's the first thing I need here? Someone shout it out.
A use state?
Yep, we need our use state. We're going to call this quantity, set quantity. And I think it's safe to say that the default here could be 1. I don't think anyone's ever going to want to buy 0 of something. So maybe we'll make that our default. And our inputs, how are we going to control this input using the state? What properties do we need in here?
Like a plus button?
We have our plus and minus button. Let's handle that separately. But if I want to control the value of my input to be whatever the state is, what properties do I have to throw on this input? OnChange, that's one of them for sure. We need to say when my input changes, grab the event, and my state is going to be the new value in event.target. So event.target, the input is the target since that's what's throwing the event. And then we grab the new value and we set that to be our state. What's the other thing we need in here?
Do you need to set a counter like +1?
We're gonna do that. We're gonna do that with this button down here. We're gonna increment set quantity by 1. So you're just slightly ahead. But what do I have to do on this input specifically? Got type. Ooh, we got value. All right, that's what I was looking for. We also need to say on this particular render, the input is going to have a specific value, which is my quantity, whatever that is. And when that changes, it'll cause our component to re-render and it'll assign that new value into the input. And Charisse is a little bit ahead of us. And so we're going to now use this incrementer and decrementer to say, when my incrementer is clicked, we're going to set the quantity to be quantity plus 1. And up here, we're going to do set quantity minus 1. Or you can do minus minus or plus plus, whatever you want. And then we have a button down here. We'll call this add to cart. This is going to look really disgusting when it actually shows up, if it shows up. Oops, it's not working. What console error do we have though? Table.jsx. Ooh, I think I probably didn't update some of the imports when I move stuff around. Okay, this is components, product table. Or maybe this folder should just be products or something. We'll leave it as product table for now. Data, dummy data, that looks good to me.
You know,
Table.
if you run your terminal at the bottom, it'll tell me all the places that have problems in my code.
It should. Yeah, I would expect that if I'm getting errors, it would show me in the terminal where I'm running it. I'm just doing it in a separate terminal instance. All right, let's make sure everything else looks good here. Up 1 level and miscellaneous for the search bar. All right, that looks better. All right, so there's no CSS here, but this at least works. Maybe we can throw in some quick CSS just to make it look a little prettier. Once again, I'm just going to write some inline CSS since this is a pretty small component. But feel free to make like a style sheet if you'd like to do it that way. I think a good ways into this course, we talk about different ways of doing styling using modules or style sheets or like other ways of generating styles. But we'll leave that discussion for another time. So my style on this button, I want my height to be, I don't know, maybe 30 pixels and width 30 pixels. Okay, I just want them to be pretty square. It's probably a little bigger than I need. We'll do the same thing down here. And then the input, we're gonna say, we'll have a max width of maybe 40 pixels. Does not need to be that big. Sweet. And then my input, I also want to give a margin left of maybe 10 pixels, margin right of 10 pixels, just add a little bit of space. Actually, that looks worse. Never mind. And then I do want to have a margin on this button. 5 pixels. Just a little bit of space there. Cool. And then the whole container. I'm gonna indent it a little bit. So we'll add a little bit of margin on that as well. Do not take any of these stylings to be like good practice or, you know, being really careful about being efficient with rules. I think we could do this a lot better, but for the sake of speed.
I like how you organized your components in folders. It's a lot clearer.
Yeah, it's there's no good way of doing it. Everyone does it a little differently. So feel free to organize however you want, but at some point when you have enough things going on in your application, you're going to need some semblance of order to figure out, okay, I want to find this component. Where on earth is it?
Yeah, because for our homework, I have like 7 files and then it starts to get confusing. So
Yep.
I like the idea of you putting it in miscellaneous product table and all that.
Yep, you can even do that for your homework, I think. As long as all the files are there, I don't think anyone's going to care where you put them. All right, cool. So we have our little widget here. Doesn't do anything yet, but you can see that the incrementers and the decrementers work. And I can also just manually type in something that I want. Oops, that's not good. All right, so if I type, so it works incrementing and decrementing, and then if I type in a new value, now it's just adding a 1 on the end, which to me indicates that this is a string. So it's a number when the page first loads, because that's what our state is. Our state is a 1, it's a number. And I can increment and decrement, which sets a number back into quantity. But when I am setting the quantity manually by changing, it looks like this is probably a string. And so now my state is a string, and adding 1 to a string doesn't work like you would expect. We could actually test this out in the console. So if I have 0 plus 1, that's 1. If I have 0 plus 1, well, it just tacks the string on the end. This is string concatenation. And that's bad. We don't want that. So let's console.log and here really quick, just to make sure e.target value is what we expect. Assuming that it will be a string. Okay, so it's back to being a string. I think we probably need to set the type on this input to be a number.
Use type of?
Type of is a JavaScript construct that gives you the data type of a variable. Up here, this type is a field that applies to an input element that says what kind of stuff can I actually put in there. And that has added the little decoration with the up arrow and the down arrow, which I would like to get rid of, but I don't know offhand. Get rid of number input arrows. I think there's a property for this. Whoa, this is crazy. All right. Let's just throw this in our general CSS file that will apply globally. So our index.css, make sure that's getting imported. Cool, hopefully that got rid of it. Sweet. Okay, so now I can still increment and decrement, no problem. But if I type in a new value, it's still a string, even though I told you that it's supposed to be a number. That's really interesting. I don't recall having issues with this in the past. We can fix that though. So let's go back into our quantity selector. And we'll say new quantity is equal to number. So we're going to take this e.target.value and try and parse it into a number. And if our new quantity is not a number, so if they like typed in a string like with letters, then we don't want them to be able to do that. All right, fine, we'll use your function. In this case, we will console.error invalid quantity. Target.value. Return, otherwise we'll set the quantity down here. See if this works. So I have 1, I have 12. Oh, I gotta update it down here. So new quantity is where we're gonna be putting in the state. 1, 2, 3, and my increment still works. Sweet. That was the other thing I was concerned about. So if I put an empty string in there, like if I try and delete the last number and I have an empty string, what is it going to say when I do that on change event? And it looks like if I convert an empty string to a number, it's smart enough to know that I probably want 0, which is great. I don't want not a number here. This is fine. And I was thinking we were going to have to put some extra logic in there, but I guess not. Okay, we got our increment. We can now type stuff in there. Looks good to me. Let's do the fun part now. We got this. All right, so all of our products have a incrementer and a decrementer. So now we need to actually figure out where we're going to make this cart live. So my plan is to maybe make a cart display like up here at the top on top of my search bar, or maybe we do it at the bottom just to separate those out. And we'll just show like what items are in the cart, how many of each thing. And maybe we can like add a button that doesn't do anything to check out, just so that to say that we have it. So with that in mind, maybe we put together a component really quick to do that. And it doesn't have to do anything yet. So our miscellaneous, now we're going to put our cart display JSX function cart display export default cart display. And what I would expect to get in this display is an array of objects. So we want our object to have a product, which is going to be my product type. So in our dummy data over here, we define this product type, which has all of these fields. And I want to get an array of objects that specify a product plus an additional quantity field. So this is going to be an integer. How many of those things are we buying at this moment? And maybe we'll start by just displaying those things. So we'll just create a dummy cart for now. And talk about the state and props element of this in a second. And we'll say this product is dummy products. Get the first element. And my quantity is going to be 3. And then we'll add one more thing to our cart. Our quantity is going to be 1, and it's whatever the second item is. And then in our dummy cart, we can render out a little display here. So we'll make it a box. We'll make it maybe an unordered list in the box. So it's just a bunch of bullet points. And then our dummy cart, we're going to map product to a list item. And this list item will be a string that specifies product.name. And it's maybe product.quantity. Cool, let's see what this looks like. We gotta make sure we actually include this cart display somewhere in our app. I think this deserves to go outside of the table, so I'm gonna put this in my app.jsx for now. We'll move our table into another little box here. And maybe at the bottom of the table, we'll add our cart display component. And if I scroll down here, there's nothing there. All right, that's not good. Cart display, return unordered list, dummy cart.map. We'll close the split screen because I think this is causing problems. Okay, so dummy cart.map should have an unordered list. Why do we not have that? We have our root, our div. This is our table up here, and our div and an unordered list. Okay, what's the problem here? Oh, it's because I have the wrong syntax here. One thing to be aware of, if you're writing an anonymous function like this, if you put curly braces here, you explicitly need to return something from the function. So I have to return a list item. It's telling me that I'm missing the key. I was hoping that I could ask someone to point out what I was missing, but it's just going to do that for me. We'll differentiate this here by making this a little bit more verbose. So my cart has these objects that have both a product and a quantity. So they are products with quantity. We can grab the product data or the quantity itself. All right, this looks a little better. So my cart right now is 3 lamps and 1 chair. Cool. Let's maybe add like an H3 in here and say your cart. And other just bells and whistles, maybe dummy cart length is 0. Then we're just going to show you have nothing in your cart. Otherwise, we'll display this unordered list here. And so there's something in here. And then if I were to clear this out, maybe I'll just comment these out for a second. Now it shows me I have nothing in my cart. Cool. All right, that's as much HTML as we're going to do. It only took us 35 minutes. Let's do the fun stuff. So I don't want to just use a dummy cart. I want those buttons to control what I'm doing, such that when I click add to cart, it's going to try and add that many of an item to my cart. So we need to figure out, where is that going to live? How does my data get to the cart? So anyone have any suggestions about maybe where I could store like a piece of state for this cart display? Should I put it in this cart display? Should I put it in a different component? What do you guys think?
Where should you put the cart display? Usually in the nav bar at the top. Usually there's an icon of a shopping cart. And then usually it'll say 0. And then when you put something in, it'll say 1.
Yeah,
Is that what you're asking?
I think I asked a bad question. I'm
Oh,
specifically interested in, let's replace this hard-coded data with some piece of data or some piece of state that keeps track of what is in my cart right now. And where should I put that state? Should I put that state in my cart display? Should I put it in my product table? Should I put it in my app.jsx? Like where should that state live and why?
I would maybe put it to a separate thing, like separate file, and then connect it so that to maintain the logical thing that it's like somewhere else.
That's one option.
wouldn't you put it in a SQL database?
I could do that. That would be a little overkill for a cart, I think. But you certainly could do it. If I were running a database, I would expect that to be running on like a backend server somewhere. And that would be one way to persist my cart. So like if I add some things to my cart, maybe I'm actually like representing someone's cart in a database. And then when they next log on, whatever was in their cart, I can pull that from the database. That's probably overkill for our purposes. I think it's enough to say this cart exists on their computer and it's keeping track as they go through our website. And when they go back onto our website later, for now, it's fine to clear it away. Any other thoughts? We had one vote for let's make a separate file and keep track of our data there. So like maybe we created like a JS file here and say cart products.js, and then we could like have an array here that says my cart. And then from another file, I would like import my cart in this quantity selector, for example, like if they hit add to cart, do like an on click and say my cart, import it from the other file dot add products one or something like this. Does that generally agree with what you were suggesting? Any other suggestions? Okay, the one thing I will say is that in React, we do not want to store any data outside of a component. So I can create maybe just like constants that are never going to change. So maybe I have a constant here that says like default quantity is equal to 1. And then instead of just putting a magic number 1 here, and everyone's like, well, why did you choose 1 as the default for the quantity? Well, the reason why is because I think 1 is a good default quantity. And so this constant title gives me a better description of why that number was chosen. In this case, it's pretty obvious that 1 is a good default quantity, but in some cases it can be helpful to make a constant like this. But I should not be making anything that's mutable outside of my components in React. That is just not a React-y way of doing things. Maybe you can make it work.
I have a question.
Go for it.
So like, say I order a lamp and say I order 3 lamps and I think, hey, I don't have any money this month. I want to order 0 lamps. So if I go to 0, will it take it out of my cart?
We could program it to do that. We don't have any way right now for our cart to take something out because we just have like a positive number here, and then we'd click add to cart. But maybe if we have time at the very end, we'll just like add a button down here to take it out of the cart. Like if, you know, I wanted to do this in the past, but a day later, I don't think this is for me. Let me take it out. That would be a very good feature to have. We're gonna have to program it though, for sure. My recommendation here for this piece of state is that in general, a piece of state needs to live at the highest level component that needs access to it, plus all of its children that need access to it. So if I were to draw out the hierarchy of my application right now, we'll do this in a comment. So we have our app component, and our app has a table and a cart display. And inside of our table, we have we have a search bar. Then we have a group of products, listing, product, listing, and so on and so forth. Could be an arbitrary number in there. So what components care about our cart and the number of items in the cart, or some way to interact with the cart? Which components should actually care about it? I would argue the cart display definitely cares, because the cart display needs to know what is the current state of our cart. But also these product listings need to be able to access it. They don't need to show you how many things are currently in the cart, but they do need to be able to add to the cart. And here for this cart display, we need to be able to see current items, remove items from the cart. So my piece of state needs to live at basically the closest common ancestor of everything that needs access to it. I can't put my state in my product listing. There's no way to just pass an arbitrary piece of state and have it accessible from somewhere else. So I wouldn't be able to get to a state in my product listing from cart display. Similarly, I can't just put my state in my cart display because then I can't get to it from my product listing since product listings are not a child. We can very easily pass state down. When a piece of state changes, it's going to re-render all of its child components underneath. And we pass that state as properties such that when that state changes, those child components re-render with new properties. So the closest common ancestor to both of these is actually our app component here. So I would want to put my state right here. So my state is going to live in my app component. I'm going to pass that state as a property to my cart display so that it has access to whatever the current amount of things are. And rather than passing the exact like cart itself or the state setter such that I can set any amount of items in my cart, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some functions in my app component here that control adding a certain amount of things to the cart. And I'm going to give those functions all the way down this tree to my product listing and say, product listing, you can add to the cart, but that's it. You can't just set an arbitrary value. You just tell me how many things you want to add of a particular product, and I'll do that for you in my app components. So we want to pass our properties down, our state down as properties. And then in order to update that, we're going to use a chain of handlers in order to pass a function that's declared in the same file as our state. And that handler is going to be what actually mutates that state for us. So let's do it. We got about 15 minutes. I think we can speed run this pretty easily now that we have a good idea of what we want to do. So this is my cart, my setter function for this state. And we said that our cart is an array of those objects that have a product and a quantity. So maybe I'm going to take that cart display comment and we'll throw it up here in our app.jsx as well, just so we have an easy reference of what those items are. Cool. So our cart display needs to know what our current cart is. So we'll pass that as a property. And then now I can receive that property. We're going to use that destructuring syntax to say, take the cart property and put it in a variable called cart. And then instead of using our dummy cart here, our dummy products, we're going to use our actual cart, which for now is going to be empty. So if I go into my page, there's nothing down here. Cool. And just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. I think those are old comments, which is great. So I'm going to go back into my app.jsx. We're going to get rid of this cart product since we don't want to just create randomly mutable data. And in my app.jsx, we're going to do something with this setter function. So again, eventually I need to pass to my table and then pass into the product listing a function such that it can add a number of products. But I don't want to just give the setter function itself because then they could do whatever they want. I could accidentally use that setter function to assign a string. Like I could accidentally, like we did earlier, where we thought we were setting a number, but we were actually setting a string. We don't want to do that. What we want is for someone to tell us in the app.jsx, I want to add this amount of this product. And so I'm going to declare a function, add quantity to product. And maybe we'll take in the ID of the product and how much to add. There's two parameters here. And if all of my objects in here are of this format, I need to go through here and pick out the product that has a matching ID and then add that amount and set my new state. So let's do that. We can write a for loop here. I usually like to just do the long syntax, but you can do like a ranging loop if you want. So we'll do our cart.length. Our product is cart of I if, actually we'll call this product with quantity as well, just to differentiate when I call product.product, that can be really confusing. So if this product has the ID that matches our ID parameter, then I'm going to add my new quantity. And we'll break out of this loop because we already found the item. There shouldn't be another item with the same ID, so we don't have to keep looking. So we're going to break out of this loop. All right. So now I have my new state. I need to set that state because otherwise this component won't know that it needs to re-render. A naive person might do this, saying, well, we updated an item directly in our array, so we can just set it to be the same array. We can't do that. Anytime that we use state, if we set it to be the same array or the same object, even if things have changed inside that array or object, React is going to say, oh, it's the same thing. I don't need to re-render. So we need to explicitly give it a new array. And the way we typically do that is by spreading out all of the items in our array into a new array. So my cart, I'm going to spread it out and create a new array here. Is it this? Oops, I put the dots on the wrong side. My bad, guys. All right, so we have this function, and this is what I want to pass down to my cart listings. So we'll pass it into our table, add product. Actually, we'll name it the same thing. I generally like to keep the name of the property and the function or the data pretty similar, just to reduce some confusion. If like the names are changing every time you pass it down to a different item, it can get a little confusing in my opinion. So we'll update this props to be our data, but also this function. And then we will pass to our product listing this same function. So we're just going to pass it down one level. We don't actually care about it in this table itself. We literally just want to pass it to our product listing. And this is what we actually want. And when I click in my quantity selector, when I click this button, then I want to call this function. So let's just pass it in for now. I don't like this, but we're going to do it for a second, and then we'll talk about why I don't like it. So now, if I click this button, we call add quantity to product, and we need to give it an ID, and we need to give it that new quantity. The new quantity is easy. The ID is not as easy. We wanted this to be a generic component, right? We don't really want this to be like a product-specific implementation. So I generally don't want to pass any data in here or any functions that are related to a specific type or a specific piece of data. Maybe I have other types in the future. Maybe I want to like order a certain number of like audiobooks. Maybe we're making an Amazon, and that's not exactly like a clothing item, but it's like a different type of data. I don't want to have to assume that everything is going to be of the same model and say, oh, we'll pass in the ID of whatever the product this is selecting is. maybe instead, I just want to pass in a generic function, which is submit new quantity, or we'll just call it add quantity. And so what we can do instead is use this generic function that doesn't care about the data type and say, just add this amount to whatever product this is representing. In this case, it is representing an actual product item, but it could be like an audiobook or a movie or something in the future. And then when I use this component somewhere else, I can create my own function that says, okay, I'm adding this quantity. It's just a number. What do I do with that number? Well, in the case of a product listing, when I add quantity, what this is going to do is this is going to run a separate function that just adds quantity to products. And this knows information about the product. And it gets that data from my quantity selector about how many things. So this is getting passed out of this generic component. The component doesn't have to know anything about the implementation of like the actual data. And the only thing that cares is this product listing, which is specific to products. Maybe we have like a movie listing or an audiobook listing component in the future that has different HTML in here. In that case, we would write a different add quantity function that uses a different handler that gets passed out and stuff like that. That's really confusing. Do we have any questions about anything that I just mentioned related to this quantity selector? It's kind of like a concept that you'll hear in the profession, like let's separate responsibilities. Questions, concerns, or does that relatively make sense? All right, I'm going to assume that people are okay. Feel free to bring it up later if it's not. All right, so we have our product listing. We pass this add quantity all the way down. And when I submit my quantity, it should update. So let's try it out. Our cart is empty. I'm going to add 3 backpacks and I add to cart. Oh no, it didn't work. And our table component props is not defined. Let's make sure that that's a current error. Oops, no, it's not. All right, let's figure out what's going on here. So I have my submit button, add to cart. On click, we're going to add quantity. Let's make sure that's actually working. If I go back up to my app.jsx, is this getting called? Figure out where the gap in logic is. Okay, so this function is getting called. So we're passing it all the way down. Item of ID 2, which is 0, 1, 2. We're adding a quantity of 3, so that looks good. And then I think this function isn't doing something properly. So we have our cart. We set our cart to be cart spread out. You know what? This is saying if something is already in our cart, add a quantity to it, but we don't have any logic for, well, what if it's not in our cart? In that case, we need to add it with the default quantity. So maybe I create a Boolean here. So let found equal false. And I say, when I do find the right ID, found is now true. And then down here, outside of my loop, if I did not find the quantity, then I know, or if I didn't find the product, then I know the product is not in my cart and I need to add it. So set cart, whatever was previously in my cart, plus a new item where the product is dummy data, dummy products dot. Actually, rather than passing the ID, I think we should pass the whole product object, because then we can just say put the product in here with the quantity, how much. If I just use the ID, then I don't have any way to actually access the whole object. So let's do that. Add quantity to product in our table, in our product listing, rather than passing product.id, we're gonna pass the whole product. And let's see if this works. Nope, still nothing. All right, what are we doing wrong here? If it was not found, then we're going to set our cart to be what was previously in the cart plus a new thing. Ooh, I think these are both running. So I need to return here because this is going to set our cart to be the thing plus a new item. And then this is going to set our cart to be the old thing, which doesn't have the item in it. And I think they're running over each other. So we'll return here to say this is an early exit condition. I set my cart, I'm done. Sweet, that looks a lot better. All right, so now if there's nothing in there, it's going to add a new thing. I can add some more if I want. Maybe this is now 1, and it goes from 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. We can add 10. Now I have 16, and I can add some other stuff in here too. My really cool chair. Now I have 3 of those. Sweet deal. We have a cart that works. It stores all of our stuff until I refresh my page, and then it's all gone. I think maybe next week or the week after is when we'll talk about local storage, which is a way that we could persist this cart beyond a page refresh. As Charisse was mentioning earlier, we could also put this on our backend and have it stored away in like a database somewhere so that that data never goes away. And that way, if I wanted to have the same cart, like maybe on a phone version of my site and also on a computer, or maybe I want someone to be able to log in from different computers and be able to access their same cart, then I would definitely need to put that on our backend server somewhere. And in that case, I would probably want to store it in a database. But we'll definitely get some practice using local storage to persist this cart a little bit more. And we'll probably spend some time making this look a little prettier, do some cool stuff with it. But it's 8 o'clock, so I don't want to take any more of your time. I will stick around as usual for questions, so feel free to stick on if you want. If not, make sure to fill in the sign-in form on your way out. It's on the agenda posted in the Slack. I will not see you guys next week. Have a great Thanksgiving, everyone. I hope everyone does something really exciting over the next week. And I will be back 2 weeks from now for another group session. So have a good weekend. Have a good Thanksgiving. Have a good night. And talk to you guys later.
Have a nice Thanksgiving as well. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you. Have a good night.
All right, I don't hear any questions, so I'm probably going to call it here. If you do have any questions, speak now or forever hold your peace.
I have a question. Would
Sure, go for
you
it.
mind turning off the recording?
Turn off the recording?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could do that, no problem.